MultiversX is one of the most secure and scalable blockchains in all of crypto. And part of the reason why is because they use what's called adaptive state sharding, which they created from the ground up. And in this video, I'm going to go over exactly what it is because it can be kind of complicated. And there's 6 different areas that I'm going to cover, starting with what is sharding, also how is it used in blockchain architecture, why it's important to the scalability of blockchains, the different types of sharding, since there are 3 different types, what does adaptive mean in their adaptive state sharding, and also why the MultiversX approach to sharding is so groundbreaking. So let's dive right into it. So to begin, we need to understand what sharding is. And the word shard means a small part of a whole, and was first introduced as a way to break up databases into smaller and faster parts. Now imagine you have a database with 10,000 files. That's a lot of data taxing the system. So let's go ahead and break it up into 4 different databases or shards of 2,500 each. They're able to process much more throughput and handle the data in a much better way. So that's what sharding basically is. It allows the system to be broken up into parts to handle more data and throughput. Now imagine you could also guess why this could be important for blockchain. Just as in databases, blockchains can have massive amounts of data. And on top of that, just by having one string of blocks, blockchain, the throughput and the amount of transactions you can put through is limited. But imagine if you have multiples running at the same time in the same space, you could put through much more transactions because they're running in parallel to each other. So that's why sharding is important to blockchain, because it allows you to break up the network into smaller pieces and process far more transactions in parallel. And this, I truly believe, is the future of blockchain scalability. And it's the only way we're going to grow with adoption is by using a sharded architecture. Now it also gets a little bit more complex than that because there are in fact 3 different types of sharding: network, state, and transaction. And I'm going to try and break down each one of them to make it a little bit more simple to understand. But know that MultiversX is the first to solve and implement all 3 forms of sharding. And it's a very impressive feat because it is not easy to do. It's probably one of the hardest things to do in blockchain architecture, actually. So let's go ahead and start with network sharding. What network sharding is that it takes the nodes and shuffles them randomly to help keep the security of the network. So it makes them less predictable, so people can't attack a shard and take it over because you don't know where a node is going to be, and the nodes are shuffled randomly and you don't know who's going to be shuffled, so it's provably impossible to take over the network by attacking it. The second type is transaction sharding. This is basically processing multiple transactions at once. And how this is done is because each shard of the blockchain is able to process a transaction. So currently there are 3 shards on MultiversX, and they're each able to process a transaction simultaneously. And currently the TPS, or transactions per second, of the blockchain is 10,000 per shard. So 10,000 times 3 shards, it's 30,000 TPS that MultiversX can technically do right now. And that's actually going to be boosting above 16,000 pretty soon per shard. And they're going to take it even further than that. So that's the transaction sharding part of it. The third is state sharding, and this is by far the most difficult to accomplish. And most blockchains that try sharding actually skip out on it because they can't solve it and they don't think it's worth the trouble, but it really is. What state sharding is basically breaking up the entire state of the blockchain into sections, into segments or shards. So again, go back to the database example that we used previously with 10,000 files in one database, and then we took and we put 2,500 in each. Well, that's what state sharding is. You're taking the blockchain, the entire ledger of the blockchain, and breaking it up into multiple shards. So they only have to store their section of the data at any given time instead of the entire ledger, which can grow really large. And if you require nodes or validators to store the entire ledger of a blockchain, especially with future adoption that's coming, the amount of data that they have to store can be incredibly large. So by utilizing state sharding, they're able to break that up into multiple shards and make it much simpler for validators to manage. Now this is where the complexity and difficulty come into play with a state sharded blockchain, because when you have multiple shards, they need to be able to communicate together and communicate with each other. And the brilliant approach that MultiversX took is they introduced the meta shard or meta chain. And this is what helps all these different shards communicate with each other, and also helps with finalization when you're trying to do transactions across multiple shards. And it is a brilliant approach on how to allow these shards to communicate. And the best part is that this meta chain, or meta shard if you like to call it that, only has to handle tiny amounts of data from each shard, what's called a hash basically. So it's very tiny amounts of data and it can handle a lot of it. So this meta chain can handle up to 20,000 shards currently. And if you do the math, 20,000 shards times the current TPS per shard, we're looking at over 100 million theoretical TPS that MultiversX can do with the system that they have in place. Now that covers the 3 different types of sharding, as I mentioned: network, state, and transaction. But if you recall, I said they use adaptive state sharding. And this is where it gets really interesting, because the adapted part, what that means is, as the ecosystem and usage continues to grow, MultiversX can continue to add shards with demand. I mentioned previously, the meta chain can handle up to 20,000 shards. Well, that's where it comes into play. With adaptive state sharding, the chain can add shards with demand and grow so far into the future and handle everything that could possibly come at it, dealing with millions, if not hundreds of millions of TPS in the future. And that's why their method is just so groundbreaking, because they're building a super strong foundation that could take the chain far into the future with just minor adjustments. Hopefully by now you can see why I am so incredibly bullish on MultiversX and what they are building. Because again, they're the first to solve and implement full state, transaction, and network sharding, and build this amazing foundation that is going to take them so far into the future. Unlike many other chains that are building for today and the 10,000 or 50,000 TPS that we may see, I fully believe that almost everything is going to be on the blockchain and digitized in the future. We're going to see the need for millions upon millions of TPS in the future. And there's only one chain currently that can handle that type of throughput, and that's MultiversX.